What entails your role as sports editor?
As sports editor, I run the sports desk at the Appalachian, and so some things that are kind of contained in that role would be um, managing all the reporters on the desk. So that's a lot of reporters will come with questions and will submit their stories. It's leading desk meetings, which is where we come up with those story ideas. We discuss story ideas and story updates for stories that are going on, and overall just kind of build camaraderie amongst the desk, where we just talk about sports, have fun. Um, but it's mostly leadership skills. I have an associate. His name is Ethan Smith, and a lot of the questions that reporters have and things like that will now go to him, because as sports editor, my role for the most part is to lead the desk and then do the nitty gritty of editing stories and communicating with higher up editors like the copy editor, the managing editor, visual managing editor, and editor in chief. But also as sports editor, some of the smaller stories that other people don't want to cover, it's my role, or the associate sports editor, to cover the stories that other reporters don't want to cover. So,
What are some of the challenges associated with being a sports editor that you encounter?
well, it's a demanding job. With sports, there's so many different events all the time that you kind of always have to be on top of what's happening in the App State and Boone sports world. And me and the way that I live my life, I don't love to be on my phone much. I don't have social media. I don't keep up with that kind of stuff regularly, and so it is like a job and a task for me to keep up with that stuff. And also with not being on my phone much and not being on social media much, the questions that reporters have, or the constant journalism itself, is a job where it's just constant communication. Obviously, the journalism major here is in the communications department, and so communication is a huge part of it, and that's really the biggest difficulty for me, because I really enjoy getting away and living my own life. I love this job and I love writing, but the communication part of it is probably the most challenging part for me.
Can you remember a time during your tenure as sports editor that was particularly taxing or enduring, that pushed you to the absolute limit?
Yeah, this year. So in football, we had a 3-week span this year where we played Carolina the first week, which was like the biggest home game here ever. Enormous week. There was build up for it. We were writing previews, all this kind of stuff, because it was our first game of the season too. And then after that huge week, we went and played at Texas A&M. They were number 6 in the country at the time, and so that was a big game for us. And then we won. So kids were jumping in the duck pond afterwards, and so we were having to communicate. I was actually at a retreat that weekend, so I was away, but I was having to communicate to everybody back home, like, hey, can you go get this video, do this, trying to coordinate all that stuff. We had reporters get stuff on SportsCenter, and so it was very hectic. And then College Game Day the next day decided that they were coming to App, or maybe later that night. But it was that weekend decided they were coming to Apps, and then the next weekend we had College Game Day, which was the biggest thing ever here. And that was like the 3rd week in a row of just crazy sports news with the football team, and I was up for 43 hours straight, I think, that weekend, and it was my birthday on that Saturday. And then, of course, the game itself, naturally, we had to win on a Hail Mary tipped pass, which then, of course, was all over SportsCenter again. So those 3 weeks in particular, it was just nonstop reporting. I was being asked to go on several podcasts for Texas A&M people. Carolina guys had me on their podcasts. It was nonstop every day, just all out for the newspaper. It was a ton of fun, but obviously didn't sleep much, so it was taxing.
Can you just talk a little about what goes into helping make a print edition of a newspaper?
Yeah, so for us, I can flip over to the sports section. Our role for this, for some different print issues, we have a particular angle that we're coming at. And so recently in February we had, which is this edition right here, it was kind of a Black History edition. And so we had stories that were tailored towards that subject or that topic. But what we do is, as a desk, we discuss some stories that we want for that print edition, which they're like larger stories, larger features on particular athletes, alums from the university. And then we spend weeks on those stories, getting a bunch of different sources so that they can be large stories, good enough for print. We want at least 3 different sources for every print story. And then, obviously, you edit them. They get edited by all the editors. And then we have to... Layout is the kind of tricky thing about print editions. And it's not something that I have to deal with. It's more so we have an editor, McNeil, who does most of the layout stuff, and the higher-up editors, like the managing editor and editor-in-chief, visual managing editor. Those 3 have to really deal with the layout of the paper. But I have to communicate with them ahead of time. These are the pictures that we have for this. These are the headlines. This is how many words we're looking at, just so they know how this is all fitting. This is what I think would be a good pull-out quote to it. Like right here is a pull-out quote. This would be a good pull-out quote. But for the most part, with print editions, the whole layout is kind of up to higher-up editors.
Do you have any stories that you've done, or even stories that you've edited, that really stand out to you?
Yeah, this year, so after the Carolina game, another editor, our enterprise editor, Will Hoffman, the 2 of us wrote a story together. I can see if I can find it. It was after the Carolina opening weekend game, and it was titled "A Game Day to Remember, the Day the Heels Came to Boone." But Will and I wrote that story together, talking about just the entire weekend, because we went all around tailgates and stuff, interviewing longtime fans that are like 70-something years old, used to come out here and grill hot dogs before games when he was a student here, stuff like that. And so we just had all these really neat sources and people that we talked to before the game, after the game, and we actually won an award for that story recently. It's 3rd place in sports reporting at a recent news conference. And so that story was probably one of my favorites to write, in part because I grew up loving Carolina, and so it was cool to report on the App State side. You know, we're about to play against Carolina, and there was just so many different sources that we talked to that were like house-divided situations, which is like my family. My brother and my dad went to Carolina, but myself, my sister, and then several cousins, we all went to App. And so it's cool to see that angle from so many other families that they also had a house divided. So that's probably one of my favorite stories that I've written.
All right.